So as you heard from the panel this morning, and you heard from Adam, you have a new job, right? That's what we're suggesting, because we are suggesting that you have an even greater role to play at your institution. Why? We'll get to that later. We had a very nice group of people to help us engage in this, and they are a planning group that you can see on the screen here that come from planning side of the house, business and finance, and of course, facilities. And they really helped us to rethink, reframe, really transform and activate this collaborative approach that we're going to talk about. Pete?
What wasn't said is I can keep up with her because she's got a broken foot. That's the only reason I can really keep up with her. We said new job, right? New job. We need to make sure we agree on what the existing job is. So just a couple quick from all of you. What do you do today? Just like, not your title, like what's your job? Like, any idea what you guys do? Yeah, just shout it out. Anything? You guys just hang out at conferences like this and stare at me? What? Herd cats, okay, excellent.
Solve the problem.
Solve problems. People, project. Excellent, all right.
Everything that nobody else wants to do.
That is a really good point. And explaining what you do, right? Yeah.
So we made this list, right? We think your job's about doing whatever it takes for efficient operation, effective operation, safe operation, and stewardship of the campus, right? And occasionally maybe paying attention to your families, right? And you do that through a bunch of things, but also particularly communicating with the rest of the world, because most people on your campuses don't necessarily know what to do, or you have to tell them what you do or why it's important, right? So that's a pretty ongoing issue. But the reality is that is ironically kind of passive, or at least reactive, right? We're going to assert that it's a lagging behavior, not a leading one.
I think Pete's exactly right. When you think about all the things that were on that screen, and you look at all the time that you spend trying to explain to people what you do, why you do it, where you do it, when you do it, et cetera, it takes up a lot of time, but it's still more reactive and passive. And so we think that in today's reality, you don't really have time to do that, because your stewardship role demands, and its demands are so acute, that you really need to start thinking about how you transition to be a key participant and a key player at your campus. Pete, you talked about it with stories, and the first panel talked about it. It's really transitioning into that planning, decision-making role. And that's not so easy with all the things that you identified, right? But that is a whole different ballgame. So I do think, and I have an opportunity to talk to a lot of the senior leadership on the presidential and the business officer and the vice presidents for student affairs side of the house. And I see them recognizing the need for a very different approach. And I think, given the pandemic and the way you positioned yourself, you are well positioned to take this task on head on and really do it to it, okay? Now, we still see things that give us pause, right? Things that give us, there's so many needs, and they are truly reactive by their very nature, and you can see this one. If my colleague, Dave Irvin from Florida State was here, he couldn't be here, Hurricane Ian, right at the front of them, and things that they were trying to deal with. And so there's so many distractions, right? And you simply have to be reactive to these needs, whether anybody likes it or not. You have to. And so you deal with them, you react to them, and you respond to them. However, this particular one is a great example of the ones that aren't a natural disaster, but they feel like it because you have the students now, or the way they celebrate a win is to pull down the goalposts and tear up the entire turf, right? So that becomes a disaster in and of itself. Pete, you've got another one to share, which isn't so great either.
I was just thinking that I described to Lander my children as natural disasters, so it's actually not that far off to see students doing this. There are other kinds of disasters which we know are preventable. We know they're preventable. We believe we could have not made sure they didn't happen, but they do anyway. Maybe we didn't have the time. Maybe we didn't have the money. Maybe we didn't have permission to work on the building, right? But ultimately, devastating things happen. And we just hope, we hope that there wasn't program damage or, heaven forbid, right, human damage of some kind. Right? Injury or loss of life, right? These are the kinds of things that keep most of us up at night. There are also external influences that, like this one, that are astonishing, right? They're transformational impacts on our lives. And they're a special category, right? They've changed the way we see the world and do business, but they're still pressing on us. The difference is that they are transformational, right? So Jim Jackson at Nebraska is notorious in my circles for the statement that he used to be trying to get a seat at the table, and suddenly he found himself sitting at the head of the table during the pandemic, in large part because everybody else went home. They were safe somewhere else, right? But you were all there, you all lived that reality, right? But that influence you garnered at that moment, that influence you garnered because you were present, that influence you garnered because the problem needed your leadership. It revolved around a whole host of facilities issues you had to address, which brought the community together, right? And you're also decision makers within a community that is notorious for having difficulty making decisions, right? Demonstrated that you can be impactful in a way that maybe you hadn't been in the past, right? And that influence you have is something you simply cannot lose. You cannot give it up, you cannot relinquish it. Right? It's a positive impact of all of that chaos we've been through over the last several years. Now, the pandemic had impacts far beyond our campuses, right? It blew up K-12 education. I'm sure that's what they're talking about across the hall, the way in which it transformed everything about the way K-12 was working, right? It changed the way we think about community and culture and connection and conversation, right? And it certainly brought the culture wars to your campus if they hadn't been there already. They're there now, right? So it keeps feeding into transformation and change on our campus in many, many different ways, including this one.
Yeah, boy, is the internal struggles. You just talked about it, Pete, earlier with the panel on space, and you were identifying a number of things. So it's a big one internally, staring us in the face. Is it remote, hybrid, face-to-face? What's it going to be? But you're staring at some of these spaces, whether they're classrooms or they're offices, that are empty, and how you're going to deal with that. I think your institutions need your leadership on this in a big way, and you need to be at the table. How we facilities folks connect the dots between space, how you're going to utilize it, and your actual teaching, learning, and working practices is going to be huge. And I would suggest to you that for once in my life, I'm going to tell you you're unique. Every one of you is unique in this particular situation because you have unique circumstances and very different situations with which to deal with it. But you're still going to need to step up to the plate because your institutions need your leadership, especially given some of the choices that we're going to share with you that get thrust upon you. So Pete, let's look at a couple of those, and I'll close out one.
So we're doing big things. We're doing important things. We're doing really great things, right? We're solving housing problems. We're bringing top-tier design architects to our campuses to create transformative spaces to teach beauty, right? And leadership to our students, right? And we build tremendous spaces for communities to gather and socialize and be together, the kinds of things that students want to arrive at. The problem is sometimes we miss. Right? Sometimes we miss. I saw a media description of the building at Santa Barbara as Dormzilla. We'll see how it all plays out, but no matter whether it's successful or not, it's going to be a very complicated building to operate. It's down to 3,500 students, most of them without windows in their rooms. So it's a very complicated space to be operating, and they're going to be living with the legacy of that on that campus for a long time. At Case Western back in 2002, they almost blew up the board fighting over this Frank Gehry building, right? In terms of what it was going to do, what it cost, even though the guy that almost blew up the board was the one who brought Frank Gehry in the first place, and he was mad that it was expensive. And it went crazy all over Cleveland, not just at Case Western, and it has repercussions to today, right? So even though a well-intentioned project was going to do something amazing, it created all kinds of fallout that's all over the place. And then there's water.
Yeah, and Bill Paulus is looking at me saying, no, we didn't do one of those. So we didn't do any of those. But frankly, some people have, right? And I call this last one, the Jerry Seinfeld, Seth Meyers, really? A water feature? Come on. And really the biggest point to make here is, what did we have to set aside or put on hold to do that? And the very different decisions that went into it. And frankly, every one of you in the room bear the brunt of it, right? And you have the maintenance nightmare associated with it on top of that. So all of those things become the kind of challenges and chaos that you have to deal with from all of these. So it's forcing us, again, to be reacting rather than planning. And we're really trying to get our heads out of the reacting and into the planning side. So we could obsess and obsess and obsess over all these examples, and I bet you every one of you has an example that you might not even want to share, but you could share if forced to share it. And Steve, you have a funny word. It's called perseverate. Is that perseverate?
Perseverate?
Perseverate. Like, that makes me nuts. It's like a $50,000 word. I still can't get it in my head. But it means obsess. So we could be obsessing about it, and you could obsess about the ones that were all the stuff that happened before the building was built, and then all the stuff that has happened as a result, both the cultural issues, the building issues that we had associated with that built environment. But we do this to ourselves, do we not? Okay, so, but wait, there's more, because we have external struggles as well. Let's look at some of them that we have on the screen, and they are truly external struggles. They've been sort of thrust upon us from the pandemic, maybe pre-pandemic. They were definitely revealed through the pandemic, and they were accelerated. From clear vulnerabilities to untapped opportunities, I think. Pete, you and I always look at that last. Untapped opportunities here. I don't know how you created that one on the panel, but you did. All amidst this backdrop of, look at that line, an aging built environment. And every one of you could raise your hand to that fact. But one, we can't turn back the clock, can we? No. And two, the circumstances that were surrounding the built environment are different now than they were pre-pandemic. Okay, so think about the external circumstances. You might argue with me about a few of these, but you did have an increasing student population. Now, if you're at University of Waterloo in Canada, we had this conversation, right? You're not worried about enrollment. She's wondering, what do they talk about enrollment for in the United States? Well, it's a big deal, and we'll talk in a second. You had expanding resources, even if you weren't necessarily getting all of them. You had the remote experience, but would you agree it was less of a thing, right? And then it became the popular mandate existed. Man, that's waning right now. It's a scary kind of proposition. So as you think about these things, I want you to consider this as an inflection point. So please understand, this inflection point has really put us into sort of a different perspective. So I want to share with you, in 2017, Inside Higher Ed did a survey of about 400 chief business officers, and 71% of them said that they were experiencing at their institution financial constraints. So it's not a new problem, right? Not a new problem. So what is they saying today? Well, in 2021, the American Association of Colleges and Universities, ACNU, did another survey on 700 individuals. And they found that 74% of them said that they're facing financial difficulties. Is there a sense of urgency here? Okay, I think there ought to be, right? I'm hoping that you see that there's a sense of urgency and that you're getting into their heads about it. I love this.
Do you? How does it make you feel? We've been depressing you for 13 minutes and 25 seconds. Makes me feel like this, right?
You gotta love this. Come on.
Right? The thing is, and what we love about Jackie Chan, right? What I love about Jackie Chan is he solves problems, right? He goes and fixes it. He confronts the problem. The challenge for all of you is that climbing walls, ducking under oncoming threats, and maybe kicking back aren't really solutions that are going to work for you, right? As appealing as they can be in a few meetings, I know I've been in my life, and I'm sure you've been in yours, right? So the question is, what are we going to do about it, right? We certainly know one of the things that's kicking us is this, right? Ongoing underfunding of what it takes to maintain what you have, right? If that red line is what it takes to care for the properties, historically we've seen an underfunding. It certainly dropped off after the recession. For some of you, it wasn't even there at the recession, but it dropped off after the recession. It started coming back, and then it took an even bigger dive during the pandemic. We expect to see it come back just like it did back in 2011. The problem is that it's still chasing a target that's keeping moving up, right? So you're always feeling behind. It's overwhelming. It's a money grab, though. Like, is anybody listening? I don't know, right? We're going to come back to this, right? The situation is so dire that we need to change the conversation. We can't just keep asking for more money, right? The situation is so dire that we need to become a part of the leading portion of the planning process. Now, a part, not the part, right? Many of you would love to say facilities issues are the first and foremost and most primary thing to think about when planning the future, right? We're also all smart enough to know that that doesn't make any sense, right? But we have to change the conversation. We talked about this before. Change the conversation so that what's happening, the conversation happening is not just in the facilities office, but it's happening in the boardroom the same way. That we're raising the issues to them. We're thinking about the future. We're thinking about where we're headed as organizations, as institutions, right? And we're finding a way to make sure that those facilities issues are on the table, that they're part of the conversation. But we need to do it in a way that's not debilitating, but empowering, right? Showing big, scary numbers is not helping, right? We could do it this way. We could talk about deferral, right? The numbers are getting massive, right? Heading over $100 a foot, right? If you're not talking about it already on campus, if you're talking about it already on campus, you got a shot at maybe keeping it where it is as you kind of organize things. We heard some of that this morning, trying to match up where the deferral is with what we take down, all those kind of things. That's important. It's huge. It's exciting if you can make that work. If you're not doing it, you may be facing something much worse, right? Because we know inflation is going to push up the cost of doing everything, right? I can't wait to see the numbers that we gather this year to figure out what that looks like. And then even if we get that soft landing that the Fed's telling us they're going to help us do, right? It's still going to be a number that's going to be skyrocketing. And if you're not incorporating those things, right, like Peter was talking about, trying to take down buildings that you're not going to use, right, you're going to be facing a very, very dire situation very, very quickly now, right? That's not really, I'm saying all those things to be truths, but that's not really a way to convince anybody of anything, right?
Well, let's add more insult to injury. You have seen this enrollment cliff. It's coming. And that's that 2025, 2026 mark. You can see it drop and dive. You've seen Nathan Graw's work. He is a professor at Carleton College. He wrote 2 books on this, one in 2008, one in 2021. I recommend the one in 2021, The Agile College. 2/3 of that book is talking about strategies no matter what type of institution that you are engaged with. And he really gets into the retention side of this thing. I think it's fantastic. Now, we added this sort of red-gray business here where we extrapolated and extended out the problem given the birth dearth from 2020 and 2021. Now, we're looking, maybe 2022 had a little bit of an upswing, but that's a big part of this problem here. So I remember you taking a poll earlier today and you asked people how they were doing in terms of enrollment. I saw way more hands raised that said, oh, we're fine. Yeah, no big deal. Okay, raise your hands again. Are you fine? Raise your hands, you're fine. You're shaking your heads. Why is she all worried about this? What's the big problem? Well, I'm going to suggest to you, yes, you'll make your numbers. And you might even possibly get better numbers if you're at that flagship or those highly selective institutions. But I'm also going to suggest something else to you. It's the big but. But you're going to be pulling from an applicant pool that's lower down in than you've ever pulled before. And this is going to come from the marginalized, lower income, these kind of minority students, the first generation students, and from the black-brown communities. They have not been as prepared to go to college. So you might get them, because a lot of them, if you look at the data, they're not so sure they want to go to college. But maybe we can use the other answer, let's get them into voc ed, let's have them come and be trained, so that's okay. But the bottom line is, we have a problem no matter where you are, because you're going to need to provide more institutional support monies to these folks. Like it or not. Because if you believe in getting them in and also retaining them and graduating them, which is another 25% of that number you can secure, then you've got to do both things. So no matter who you are in the room, you're going to be impacted by all of this. And if you think internationalists are your answer, only the University of Waterloo can say that because Canada has been beating and knocking the socks off of every one of us in the United States and most of the world. They're 30% higher in their international enrollments. And by the way, international enrollments went down in 2015 and they continued to trickle. They may be up a little bit, but your institutions aren't going to be the place that they are going to go, and they're not the big solution to the problem. So I hope that you will take these kinds of factors in mind as you think about the decisions that you're going to make, because there are some unfortunate growth-oriented choices that you may be leaning into too tightly. And you should talk to some of your colleagues here. Pete is one of them, about how they're challenged right now and what they're doing about it. And I'm going to give you this last line. Space growth has significantly outpaced enrollment growth. Let me say it again. Space growth has significantly outpaced enrollment growth. We got the data. We can prove it. Do we not? Gordian, boom, it's huge. The difference is staggering. So this is why we're here to say that your job has changed. It's sort of back to our opening premise of planning must be transformed. And you can see it on the screen. Planning must be transformed. I'm going to suggest to you that facilities professionals must absolutely have a voice in the institutional decision-making processes, not the accommodation process. You get what I say when I say that. Yeah, okay, we'll do that. Yeah, okay, we'll do that. Yeah, okay, we can't say no. We do it. We just do it. We're going to have to push back. There's no way we can get there from here. Hence, I think it's integrated planning, which gets us to please do not think that you want to frame this problem from only a facilities perspective and a facilities issue, because that will get us even to bigger trouble. And Pete's going to talk to you about the fact that this is your new reality. Let's take a look at something a little bit different, and it's going to tie beautifully to red shoes living. He's looking at me like, I don't know where she's going. And to what they were talking about earlier this morning from the panel. Pete, have at it.
Have any of you ever presented with Lander? It is like an adventure. It is an adventure.
We're having fun.
And it is so much fun. Yeah, so we're going to try to turn the corner here a little bit on what's wrong and try to move forward to try to move towards solutions, right? We said this is what this group was working on, so we're trying to accomplish, right? We're talking about communication. We need to explore this issue of storytelling. Peter used it this morning. Other people have said it as I've talked to them. Storytelling's got to change, right? We're telling a different story. We need to think about storytelling. So how do we go about doing that, right? We're gonna make reference here to a guy by the name of Steve Nazarian who runs a business that's about storytelling, right? And he recommends cutting it down to two simple things, right? What's the problem that you're trying to solve for your audience, right? For your audience, right? And what's the common ground? The broken air handler is not your audience's problem. It's yours, right? So we need to think about how we do that. I will note, speaking of red shoes, that a good way to tell a story is to talk about your dad and wrestling when, like back in the 70s. That's a really cool thing. I don't have that story, neither does Lander, so we're going to skip that portion of this presentation. But that's also a good way to tell a story because it's really excellent. We're going to try to do this. We're going to try to recommend some thoughts around what the problem should be and what that common ground should be, right? And we're going to go this way. We're going to say that the problem isn't that your air handler is broken, it's that your institutional leaders don't fully understand this. That's the problem that you should be working on. Stuff's broken, it's going to fall off your building, it's going to happen, right? The issue is, how do you get the rest of the community to understand that? And what's the common ground? The common ground is something we learned during the pandemic. We learned that when we have a shared problem, a shared issue, right? A common concern, a common goal, we can actually come together and do some really remarkable things. And all of you can be leaders in that process, right? That's number one. And two, it's okay to agree that none of us are clear where we're headed in the future, right? A shared vulnerability is just as good as a shared strength sometimes in bringing people together. I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind as you're thinking about the process going forward. Now, I keep using the words like the future and planning and the whole thing, right? Well, Lander let me throw this slide into the deck, and I appreciate it very much. So I only recently discovered this, right? It's from the University of Houston. I don't think there's anybody here from the University of Houston, but it's really cool. Master's in foresight, right? I'm an engineer architect by training, so master's in foresight's cool, kind of fuzzy for me, but I love the idea of master's in foresight. I haven't explored it yet. I intend to contact them, but I'm here to tell you because when I was reading about the program, what was really interesting was the description. The description is about this idea, right, that futurists, professional futurists, talk about strategic and transformational change. Strategic and transformational change, whereas forecasters, and to some extent planners, right, either if you are one or have known one, right, can talk about incremental change to existing state of conditions, right? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to kind of plan and move and model, right? But people with foresight can see the world. I think we need a little bit of foresight, right? We're going to need to have that mindset in order to make the adjustment we're talking to all of you about. That's where we have to go in all this. The question is, how do you do it? And how do you begin to engage people in that conversation?
So the issue here is that we're not dealing with technical problems necessarily. Now, Adam, I would commend you. That is a technical problem, okay? But it's different. If you look up the difference between technical problems and adaptive challenges, you're going to see that adaptive challenges are all about the collective. Everyone has to lean into it. And that's exactly what you're in the middle of right now. Okay, and we believe that if we don't get that collective engaged in this entire conversation, this is where I stand on a perfect Red Shoes experience. You have the opportunity. Everybody go to the Red Shoes presentation? Yes? Yes, well, give it a round of applause. Come on, he did an awesome job, right? Yeah, and this is exactly what we're talking about. You're creating Red Shoes experiences by engaging leadership, planning, on inclusion on their terms. Those are the key words. Those are the operative words, their terms. Not your terms, not facilities terms. That's the going from the problem to a common ground to a shared understanding. Sharing facilities issues from their lens, from their frame of reference, and from their vantage point. It's a whole different ballgame. So let us give you some ways of thinking about how you could create this red shoes experience. And here are some ways of thinking about, now look at the language. That's what I think is really powerful here. There are 4 areas here that we have on the screen to focus your thinking, organize your thoughts. As you speak to senior leaders about what their facilities, I didn't say you, but what their facilities are telling them, telling us, and how they and you might act differently. I have a standing line, it's don't do more with less, do different with less. You're gonna have to get there. There's no way we can do this. So let's look at these. Embodied debt. Demands by building on institutional budgets. Did I say facilities budgets? No. Institutional budgets, right? The second one is risk exposure. You used to that. Yes, people, safety. But how about program continuity? How about investment disruption? That gets their attention. How about future program compatibility? Addressing institutional paradigm shifts. I didn't say yours, I said theirs, and what's happening. And then the final one is adaptability. I want you to think about taking the built environment and its critical link to the very nature of your campus, because you know that's true. Place matters, folks. You matter, you make a difference, I'm here to tell you. But consider the evolving student profile and the diverse community's needs, because it's getting much more diverse. And if you think about that and the adaptability, you can get your head around how you might be able to explain these things in a way that starts to get to that common ground. Okay, to this end, we wanted our team to establish some categories of thinking, and that's where we got. We got these categories of what we call a strategic framework for fostering collaboration and engagement. Okay, we throwing a lot at you at one time. Guess what? I don't care. It's all right. You're going to get all this stuff. You're going to get all this information, and you can utilize it, right? Plans for place. We then develop statements and principles that are really proving out and allowing people to start a conversation, a real conversation. So plans for place. Let's look at all of them. Pete, let's just hit them all. We don't expect you to digest all of these. However, we're going to provide access to them. So let's look at plans for place first, and you can see these bulleted items. If you don't like them in statement form, we can actually give them to you in question form if you'd rather have that. Because these are about the voices and the processes to create spaces that ensure alignment of your built environment with the institution's mission vision, with its programs, with its resources, and with the market. So why don't you, if you were to look at every one of these statements, or we could put them into questions, I want you to consider the following things: measurable outcomes, alignment, competition, prioritization, linking today's realities to your institution's unique future, flexibility, adaptability, assessment, and sustainment. This is what's wrapped into these statements and a series of questions that we have for you. How about resources for service? This is to address operational needs and opportunities. Pete, you know I will never say it's not opportunities. Consider such things as this: planning and budgeting model, assessment. Bill Paulus, you have done a fantastic job in this regard. And I call you out as you did a T3 for us, and it was amazing, the presentation that you made about what you're doing, not only institutionally, but within facilities. You want to talk to somebody who knows his stuff about this. And then raise your hand. If everybody doesn't know you, they ought to. Institutional program alignment. Managing risks. I didn't say risk management, I said managing risks. There's actually a difference, think about it. And then matching space use demands with teaching and working practices. The ways in which you start to think about that are going to have policy implications. And where is Jamie Geyer in the room? She is so smart about this stuff. Where is she? I can't see you for the light. Okay, there she is. Yeah, she has really, really good questions about this, so pay attention. And then the third category is about assessment for stewardship. These are methods, metrics, measures that sustain your built environment, but they're from the institutionalist perspective. When you look at things like tools to measure success. How many times did you say that at the panel this morning? Tools to measure success, data-driven, fact-based decision-making, plan adaptability. You're going to have to be more adaptable. And then this lagging investment, speaking to it that way so you can be part of the leading planning element. We think these are exciting ways to really get your hands around a conversation with senior institutional officers or leaders to think very differently about how you approach it. This begins to build your common ground. Pete?
Lander said we're going to make sure you have all of this because it's just mind-numbingly difficult to try to process it all as fast as we're processing it. But we have three simple thoughts that are kind of through lines for all of that we're suggesting you think about as change agents, right? I get the simple stuff, she gets the complex stuff. That's the way this relationship works. Three thoughts, right? What are you doing with what you know? How do you know what you know?
Yeah.
An ode to all of you data folks, right? And what are you prepared to stop doing?
I love that one.
What are you prepared to stop doing, right? We're all about more, we're all about accommodation, we're all about enabling. That's what our job is. We're service people, right? That's what we do. But institutionally, what are we prepared to stop doing, right? A pretty big question that's gonna scare the daylights out of anybody on your campus who's used to just not saying no to their faculty colleagues, right? It's starting to be a theme, right? Lagging to leading, right? The situation is so complicated today. The situation is so complicated today. It's so challenging. You have to change the way you have these discussions. You have to move from being reactive to participating in the leadership of the process to create the future. That's where you have to be, right? And planning must be transformed, right? It must be integrated, the facilities issues must be integrated into the institutional issues. That's what has to happen. How many of you are members of or fans of SCUP? Oh, excellent. What's the mantra at SCUP? Come on, you're members. Integrated planning, right? Integrated planning, that's what SCUP's all about.
So there's more. Yeah, not only did APA and Gordian and NACUBO engage in this, and we created a paper, but we have now asked SCUP. SCUP is now able and willing to come into this dialogue and really help frame all of this, which we think is really important and powerful to the conversation. And then there's even more. We have a white paper that's, all of this is written. It went live today. Yep, planned it. It went live today. In the November-December issue of Facility Manager Magazine, if you got that, it's in that magazine as a feature article. We're very excited about it. But even more importantly, Gordian is putting on his website, and so is NACUBO. And on top of that, there's a survey embedded in this thing. If you want to give us feedback, we would be happy for you to participate in that survey. It's going out to all those communities. And maybe, just maybe, we can get SCUP to post this thing as well and get that community, which we think we can because they're very excited about the work that's being done and rethinking the framework for collaboration.
You just can't tell them that I said that they're not futurists, right? That has to be the secret in this room, right? Mike Moss would be very unhappy if that word gets out, right? So that just didn't happen. We didn't have that conversation.
Well, we do have a little time here. We're eager to get your feedback, your thoughts about this. We think we have time. Do we have time over there?
6 minutes and 41
seconds. It says 6:41, but I don't know if that's where you want to be. So we're going to take it anyway. Go ahead, Pete.
Wow. A lot there. Obviously, this transformational change that you talked about is significant. Give you a lot of credit. Obviously, working with the associations, but it can't end there. Obviously,
No.
It has to be sustainable. And so, what is the leadership of APA, SCUP, NACUBO? What are their long-term plans to keep the sustainable the conversation alive besides an article next month? I know it will continue, Landa, so what are your thoughts about keeping this alive?
Really where we want to go, and we have some good partners at this between NACUBO and SCUP, is to get this in the hands of provosts and presidentials, the presidential associations. It's that kind of, when we delivered this at NACUBO 2022 in Denver this past July, we had folks coming up saying, oh my gosh, I can now have a solid conversation with my leadership. I can have a conversation with my president now. This makes sense to me. I know what I need to do. I know the data I need to have, and I know the kind of conversation that I need to lead this way. So we're getting that, filtering, but I think it's going to be provosts and presidents that are going to need to hear and see this. So we have, hands down, the business officers are in 100%, and we've got SCUP now in, and I believe 100%. I've just said it, so it is. This is what's going to happen. Okay, it's going to happen. But we do believe that we have tentacles to these other entities. I think it's going to be really important to driving this kind of approach to transformative and integrated planning. And let me suggest to you this, you cannot tweak yourself out of these problems with increments. You can't do it. And transformation is being accelerated, am I right? Otherwise, you're going to end up with disruptive or destructive situations. And you don't want that. I think that you really are at this, I'm serious when I said you're at an inflection point. You have an opportunity to have it, but you've got to have a different conversation. You need to come at it differently. We're hoping that you can use these statements, or we can give them to you as questions. We did that in the presentation. We transformed them into statements for a paper, but we think that if you need those in order to help drive it, we'd love to provide that to you. Is that helpful? Yes.
I think that, before I answer real quick, the other thing that's happening is that I think the associations are uniquely positioned today to actually focus on this problem, right? I think the change that's happened at APA over the last 20 or 30 years to begin to be an organization that's creating leaders, right? I mean, over my career, right, we've all gone to this place where this room had no women in it 35 or 40 years ago, number one, except Lander. She was what, you were eight or nine at that point, right? But we were basically the room full of people who were just the oldest person with a wrench in their hand, right? And the training that's gone on, the development that's gone on to change these organizations into places led by true leaders, much more diverse collection of leaders, right? Much more invested in the institution is possible because of the work that APA's been doing to transform training and process. And at NACUBA, they're beginning to understand, they've begun to understand the connection, the intimate connection between what's happening in these places, right? Notions of embedded debt are really language that's starting to resonate at places in NACUBA. The people we were talking to were excited about those kinds of concepts because they're ways of translating what it is that's happening in the lives of the people in this room into the realities of the institution, right? So those organizations are moving, and SCUP the same way, is making adjustments. And so I think it's possible to think about moving it forward, Peter, because it is not just it's not just an idea, it's an idea that's supported by the organizations that are participating in it. I saw a hand up, I can't quite see in the light who that is over there.
Yeah, but we're still in a world where a lot of emotion drives the things.
Oh my gosh.
So what I'm saying is when you take it up the line, bring some excitement with it. And, for example, I have a Airbnb that I rent out. If I thought I was renting a space out, I would have limited results. What I'm renting is an experience. And I think we have to do the same kind of transition to our leadership so that they see us in on that same game. So bring the passion to it.
That's a really great point, because if you can take the emotion out of this thing, and it's the old line, well, it's just a business decision. You're not coming with your hat in your hand, it's all about us, and this is what we have to have. You're looking at the entirety of the institution. That's why it's integrated. That's why you think about it and talk about it differently, because it does get you to a different place. It means you might have to give up some stuff. It means a variety of things. But we are at that point that we need to get moving in a very different direction. All of the institutions in the United States, whether you're in that pocket that Pete was talking about or your flagship, or it doesn't matter. We really have to get on to this. So,
Other comments, questions, thoughts?
I do feel like things are way more collaborative. It's easier for me to have a conversation with all my colleagues at NACUBA, SCUP, et cetera, and even at the presidentials, Coupa HR. Jamie, you and I talked about it after the panel, and Coupa HR is getting involved with us to talk about salaries and to do a salary survey and to think about how we are dealing with this geographically, statewide, and nationally. So these are all the kinds of conversations we need to be having.
I mean, part of the other piece back to Peter's comment, and I think about the enthusiasm, is that we need to ask for participation from you. We want you to feed back to the survey, but what we really want is from people to join in a conversation with other colleagues and try to help think about whether you're already implementing some of these ideas, right? Or whether there are ways in which you can begin to start implementing them, right? It's only going to work if we actually put it into practice. It's lovely to have a bunch of talking heads sitting in a room for a while, and blah, 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 a bunch of, almost retired people thinking about what they learned in the past. But you guys are living in the future, right?
You did not.
Right? You're living in the future, and we need to talk about how we're preparing people to take on the future and deal with it, right? So what we're looking for is institutions, schools, people to participate, to help us, to test it, to challenge it, to critique it, right, and to push it. That's how we're going to move it forward, because it's going to become more and more actionable, right? It feels compelling, but it's probably too hard right now, right? We need everybody who's able and willing to join in a conversation. contact me, contact Lander, contact Jim Hundreiser, contact Mike Moss. Please contact Mike Moss at SCUP. That would be really awesome. Contact people that you can connect with. Contact each other for all I care. Like, talk to each other and say, this is crazy. Lander's nuts. Pete's got it all together, but Lander's crazy, right? That would be cool to say too, right?
Lander's crazy. That's the standing line.
Seriously, talk about what works and what makes sense and what could make it stronger and better. It's that collaboration that's going to happen. We're all doing this because we think it makes sense, not because it's getting anywhere for any of us. We're all just kind of putting the time in to do it. We need you to do the same thing so we can turn it into something that's viable, and we really can transform. We started this out with an audacious idea, actually. The original draft, let's see if I can go back.
3 years ago. And we're in red shoes here.
Yeah.
So red shoes, red pants,
Right,
waiting.
The
get
white
your act
paper,
together, right?
the white paper says rethinking the framework for facilities, business, and planning collaboration. That's watered down. Right? The original white paper draft, the original concept draft was rethinking the framework for higher education. That's what we came up with, right?
Yeah.
Right? That's where we want to go. And we actually are delusional enough to think that the people in this room are the ones that can inspire that change and that transformation, right? We believe that because we believe that this group understands, and as I said before, this group is used to making tough decisions in a world where people are rarely making tough decisions, right? So this group has the mettle and the ability to understand it, and you've demonstrated over the last couple of years the competence in the face of everything else to work beyond the facilities framework. I always knew that about everybody I ever worked with. Just you didn't often get a chance to do it because they told you to live below floor sometimes, right? But you're all living in the light. You've been living in the light, and you need to seize that moment, and we need to use this time so we can get to that audacious goal that's kind of hidden behind this one on the screen.
Seize the day. You have the moment. You can do this. All right. We're over time.
We're done.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.